Welcome to the Cities at Tufts virtual colloquium. I'm Professor Julian Adjaman, and together with my research assistants Ainsley Judge and Max Sebar and our partners Shareable and the Barr Foundation, we organise Cities at Tufts as a cross-disciplinary academic initiative which recognises Tufts University as a leader in urban studies, urban planning and sustainability issues. We'd like to acknowledge that Tufts University's Medford campus is located on colonised Wampanoag and Massachusetts traditional territory. Today, we are delighted to host our very own Penn Loh. Penn is teaching professor and director of community practice at UEP. He's also a faculty member of Tisch College of Civic Life at Tufts. He partners with various community organisations through the Solidarity Economy Initiative, Right to the City Alliance and Centre for Economic Democracy. From 1996 to 2009, he served in various roles, including executive director at Alternatives for Community and Environment, an environmental justice-based group in Roxbury in the Greater Boston area. He holds an MS in environmental sciences and policy from the Energy and Resources Group at the University of California, Berkeley, and a BS in electrical engineering from MIT. He's published broadly on environmental and social justice issues and is currently a trustee of the Hyams Foundation and board member of the Centre for Economic Democracy. Penn's talk today is Solidarity Economy Movements in Massachusetts. Penn, a Zoom-tastic welcome to Cities at Tufts.
All right, thanks, Julian, and welcome to everybody who's both Zooming in today, and I'm also standing here in a classroom with some live students, which will make this a much better experience for me. But welcome, everybody. This has been a really hard talk for me to try to prepare for. I've got half an hour, and I'm talking about something that I've been immersed in around teaching, research, as well as practice for the last 15 plus years. So I'm not going to try and boil it all down into half an hour. I actually teach a whole class on this in the fall and see some of my students who've taken that class. But I will try to catch you up to where I am with my own understanding and articulation of what solidarity economy and solidarity economy movements are. For those of you who may not be familiar with the term solidarity economy, I'm sure many of you actually are, but if you're not, it's a term that's often used to label alternative economies that are more just, sustainable, democratic. It also applies to social movements, as well as naming cooperative practices that are as old as humanity itself. So today, I'm hoping to give you a sense of how all those aspects are happening, particularly here in Massachusetts. But as the subtitle to my talk shows, that I'm also hoping to talk about solidarity economies as potential gateways to other worlds at the end of what we've been calling colonial capitalist modernity. And I'll be trying to unpack a little bit of that for you. I'll be beginning with a story just about how I got into solidarity economy and movement work. And then after showing how we entered that space, thinking of solidarity economy as an alternative economy, where we were building worker cooperatives, community land trusts, governmental programs like participatory budgeting. Want to talk more about how I've actually not been using the term solidarity economy by itself lately. It's been solidarity economy movements, and more importantly, trying to ask the question for today in our historical moment of the now, which is how does any of this relevant given the crises and collapses that are happening all around us? So we will be asking that existential question. That's something that I'm going to engage all of you on, whether you're on Zoom or in the room. And luckily for you, I do have some answers to the existential question of does any of this matter at all? So solidarity economy movements, this is a little preview of, I've been co-writing a book on solidarity economy movements in Massachusetts. My co-author, Boone Shear, who teaches at UMass Amherst in anthropology, and we've done a lot of writing over the years. And we are more fully articulating some of these answers. And I'll just give you a quick summary of the three answers that we have. Number one, solidarity economy movements are meeting material needs, right? We're actually meeting housing needs, providing food, Number two, it's building the solidarity and political power that is absolutely necessary in this time if we are to resist and fend off fascism. And thirdly, and this is the piece that we'll be spending much more on, it shifts the horizon of possibility towards advancing other worlds. And solidarity economy movements are amongst a number of what might be called transition movements that are advancing other ways of being, that are very explicit that we're not trying to save this world as it is, but that we are trying to cultivate the other worlds that are already here, may have always been with us, and that may yet to come. Just note that when we talk about, and I'll be unpacking this further, when I talk about worlds, I'm not talking about the Marvel multiverse, right, where you've got separate planes of existence. We're talking more about the world of many worlds that the Zapatistas have as the Zapatistas expressed it. So these are entangled worlds, all part of a pluriverse, coexisting at the same time, that we inhabit and make at the same time. All right, and I'll close then with a few stories about how projects and solidarity economy initiatives in Massachusetts are navigating this world in politics. Don't want to get your hopes up too much because this is not about prescribing some type of model or vision that if we could just get everybody to sign on to it, will make the world a better place, right? This is messy work that has to happen at the end of colonial capitalist modernity. There are a lot of blockages, slippages, pitfalls, things that can make you stay stuck in the world that we have now. So to extend Audre Lorde's famous metaphor, I'm hoping we're going to come away and you come away with this talk with knowing that the master's tools will never dismantle the master's house, the original quote, but we might be able to build beyond the master's house using some of those tools. So let's go ahead and get into how I got into solidarity economy movements. So even prior to me coming to Tufts, I was involved, and I was for many years part of an environmental justice organization that helped launch a statewide green jobs coalition called the We were in the fight, the political. We won policies that set the most ambitious energy savings goals amongst states at that time in Massachusetts. It required a tripling of investment in energy efficiency programs across the state. It required utilities to work with community partners to deliver those to low and moderate income communities. And it required standards for living wages for all the folks who are doing that work, right? So we were really excited, happy about that. We thought this might be the beginning of a Green New Deal. And what was incredible to us was then learning about the possibility of community-owned and worker-owned businesses. Because once we had won these policies, we were worried, who's going to come in and do this work? How are we going to monitor these businesses so to make sure that they're hiring people from our communities, that they're treating them well, and adhering to the living wages. And then we saw that actually folks were building their own companies to do this work that were owned by communities, that were operated as cooperatives. And for us, that gave us the build side of the fight and build, right? So it was a revelation to us at the time. And just want to give you a sense of the time, the latter 2000s. It was actually really hard to talk about alternatives to capitalism, to talk about anything besides how to make capitalism less harmful. Even when the Great Recession happened, even when part of the whole capitalist real estate industry went under, right? Investment bank went under, financialization, real estate bubble burst, foreclosure crisis hit many marginalized communities very hard. Even when that was happening, there was like no progressive alternative economic response. And so for us, being able to enter into a fight and build dialogue gave us an opportunity to say, well, what kind of green jobs? Green jobs in what kind of economy? Does it have to repeat the exploitation and extraction of capitalist economies and free markets that we have been used to seeing? And for us, it wasn't just about raising that idea, folks very quickly jumped in. We were involved in helping to develop a worker-owned co-op that would do the energy efficiency work. It never launched, but the idea of it was so inspiring and powerful. Other folks actually did launch different types of cooperatives. I'll talk a little bit about those later. When I got here to Tufts, we opened up a learning opportunity for folks in the practice, in the field, as well as our graduate students, called the Practical Visionaries Workshop. We started to explore what are people doing around the world that are alternatives to capitalism. And we found many. We were inspired by the Mondragon cooperatives in the Basque region of Spain. We were inspired by the movements in Latin America, particularly Brazil, where solidarity economies were really put out there as a third way to do economy. It wasn't capitalism, it wasn't state-centered socialism, it was going to be a bottom-up way to do economy. And we were able to visit places like the Evergreen cooperatives in Cleveland that were some of the early experiments here in the United States trying to build worker cooperative ecosystems. So with all of that, by 2015 or so, we could talk about the emergence of a local food solidarity economy. Julian and I actually wrote a whole article about this back in 2018. This is a graphic that was produced for a Yes Magazine article that I was able to write for laying out kind of what is this emerging food solidarity economy look like. So let me take you through a little bit of this to give you a sense of what solidarity economy as an alternative economy looked like about 10 years ago. So it starts with the land. And many of you know about the Dudley Street Neighborhood Initiative and their struggle to have control, community control over development. In the 80s, they won the right to collectively own about 30 acres of land in their part of Boston. You can see on the top right how abandoned and vacant their land was. And on it, because they own the land, they've been able to build all kinds of things, permanently affordable housing, as well as urban agriculture, right? So you can go to the land trust now and you can see the greenhouse, the community greenhouse that was developed on the bottom right here. The organization I worked for, ACE, the youth program, did a whole guerrilla gardening program. So we're just gonna work with neighbors to take over empty lots and help them to grow food, to sustain themselves. The top left, the Urban Farming Institute of Boston. Whoops. Now, excuse me. The Urban Farming Institute now has its own land trust. And the farmers that it trains now have a place to grow food and to try to make a living as urban farmers. The food then goes into small businesses, community-owned businesses that are trying to deliver healthy, fresh, culturally appropriate food. That's the mission of City Fresh Foods, which is a catering company started by Glenn Lloyd there about 25 years ago. And they now employ 100 people. We're set up to try to figure out a pathway for young people coming out of high school to get good jobs. The Commonwealth Kitchen is now a really famous food business incubator. You can see the top right where they took over an old hot dog factory and now they've turned it into an incubator that's helped many dozens and dozens of women and minority-owned businesses to get off the ground. This is the part that I enjoy the most. This is the eating. So all of this food then comes into our stomachs. And there are outfits like the Haley House Bakery that some of you may go to in Roxbury that brings in this fresh produce and sells it. And it becomes a wonderful, vibrant third space for the community. They also run a bakery apprenticeship program for people who are coming out of prison. Dorchester Food Co-op was created and launched in the last few years to try to create a food cooperative that actually is able to serve the diverse socioeconomic community and racial ethnic diversity of Dorchester. And finally, at the tail end of this economy is the repurposing of organic waste and food waste. The Cerro Co-op was launched about just a little over 10 years ago, and today operates and serves local businesses as well as large institutions like grocery stores and university food systems. They truck away all of that organic waste to be composted and turned back into soil that goes back onto the land. right? So in some ways you can call this a circular economy as well. So when you can look at it, many of you who have learned about solidarity economies have seen a version of this diagram. We call this a solidarity economy wheel, where you can see how in every part of kind of an economy, there are different versions of how you can do that in ways that are more just, more sustainable, more democratic. And to show kind of how much this sector has grown in our area over the last 10, 15 years, I'm just going to talk about a few of the things that exist today that weren't here 15 years ago. The Greater Boston Community Land Trust Network. 15 years ago, it was just Dudley Street Neighborhood Initiative that had a land trust. Everyone else, many other communities wanted to do it, and now there's a land trust network. 7 more land trusts have joined that network in the last 10 years. And together, they actually won $2 million from the city of Boston a few years ago to create a revolving loan fund to support community land trusts. The next one, Coalition of Worker Ownership and Power, co-op. This is a coalition of 40 worker co-ops and allies that are from across the state trying to advance this business model. And this is where workers have one vote, they're equal part owners of their businesses, right? So they don't suffer from the exploitation that can happen in capitalist businesses. A few years ago, they won at the state level the reinstitution of a statewide office, Center for Employee Ownership, that actually exists to help worker co-ops and other employee-owned businesses to thrive in Massachusetts. The Boston Ujima Project, I'll be talking a lot more about this project, but it is a project that has raised almost $5 million. And it has done so from people in communities affected as well as allies. And it allocates those funds through a democratic process to community businesses that meet their standards. To this day, they have made 14 loans of more than $2.5 million. The Boston Participatory Budgeting Project, a whole Better Budget Alliance a few years ago, won the institution citywide in Boston of participatory budgeting. Now it's been the second 2 years of this process in place, and residents anywhere from you don't even have to be, you just have to prove that you're a resident above a certain age, and you can vote on how money is spent. Right now it's $2 million, and they want to increase the amount that goes into participatory budgeting out of the city budget. Okay, so in a lot of ways, we can point to what's been happening and say, wow, you know, this is great. And I have actually done this version of the talk many times in the past, where we're saying like, see, this stuff can work. We can prove the concept. Yeah, it's not that huge yet, but then, you know, so I want to go a step deeper than kind of that optimistic portrayal, which is that, you know, what are some of the critical questions and what are some of the challenges and barriers that have been run into by folks who are doing this work? One question that's come up a lot: how do solidarity economy businesses actually compete in capitalist markets, right? So it's not like they have some separate universe where they're able to just do their thing. They have to compete with other folks who are doing it differently. This is the big question that a lot of people have asked. How do you scale this up, or how do you scale this wide, right? And how do we get this so that it becomes something that affects more people materially than it is now? Or is this just going to stay kind of a boutique sector? All right. So that's one of the reasons why I've stopped talking about solidarity economy as an alternative economy only. Because to actually answer those questions, to get to a different place, requires a lot more than just building these businesses and different forms of ownership, right? Solidarity economy is actually aiming to be a transformative movement that actually also builds political power and shifts consciousness, right? Aaron Tanaka, who I've worked with a lot over the years, who founded the Center for Economic Democracy, has often said, we can't co-op our way out of capitalism. Lisa Owens, who is the head of City Life Vita Urbana, one of the grassroots organizing groups, Housing Justice, that's done a lot of work in solidarity economy. She says capitalism, heteropatriarchy, imperialism are all connected. These systems of oppressions are all interrelated and necessary for capitalism to exist, right? So if we want to transform capitalism, we've got to actually address those other things as well. So this is where we get to do a little bit of audience participation, engagement. Is this the end of the world as we know it? That's a rhetorical question. I'm going to assume that many of you might be grappling with that notion. Maybe it is the end of the world as we know it. So I'm just going to ask you all, especially for if you're on chat, what are some of the signs that it might be end times to you? Okay. And folks who are in the room can just speak up. And other folks could please post into the chat. Climate change. What's that? Extreme weather.
Like strip mining images you see.
Strip mining, so all forms of eco degradation.
Hearing people say, I give up, or giving up.
People just giving up. Okay.
How about the desperate push for right-wing fascist ideology?
The push for right-wing fascist ideology. And I've got online here, right? Erosion of American democratic institutions.
In general, also like widespread mistrust of governmental systems that push us into these like more extremes.
Yep, widespread mistrust of democratic systems and institutions, erosion of capitalistic accountability, species extinction. We're getting a lot. Okay, thank you, folks. At risk of getting ourselves too depressed, I'm just going to list a few of the ones that I was thinking about, which you've all said. Actually, nobody said wars or genocides yet, but climate, eco-catastrophe, pandemics, Black lives not mattering, loneliness, depression. These are just, so thanks for hanging with me on this. All right, this is not meant to bum you out. Okay, but I'm raising this because this is one of those existential questions that's behind kind of almost everything that people might be doing to make the world a better place, right? Because how does any of this matter if the world is actually collapsing and falling apart and self-destructing around us? So the question is, how do we meet this moment? How are solidarity economy movements possibly meeting this moment? And this is where I want to just introduce this exercise really quickly. It's called The Bus Within Us. I'm borrowing this from the Gesturing Towards Decolonial Futures Collective. And this is just saying that each of us has multiple and sometimes contradictory voices within us. We are not unified, entirely coherent beings, right? We think, feel many different things at the same time. This is a tool to just say, well, what are those different voices inside you? Can you tune into them instead of trying to block them out? Which ones might be driving your bus at the moment? And which ones might be at the back, right? So can I ask you just to take a breath, because thinking about the end of the world is not, it is definitely not anxiety ridden, right? It's by the opposite. And we, I think, need to actually just engage with it as it is. So who might be some of the passengers on our bus at the end of the world? And I'm just going to name a few that come up for me or that I've seen. And I invite you to keep track of some of your own passengers. Okay, ignore and carry on, right? So this passenger is thinking the world will save itself, maybe, and return to normal at some point. It's saying la 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 la, and feeling skeptical and maybe depressed. All right, somebody named this already. People who are just dropping out, despairing, right? Thinking it really is the end. And so they're saying, well, maybe I can just enjoy something before it goes. And again, the feeling, depressed. There's a bunker down voice. If the world's ending, then protect me and mine, because we're the deserving ones, right? Just make our side of the world great again. And the feeling, mostly fear. So that's maybe the populist version of what we're seeing. there's also an elite version of this mentality, which is escape. Some of you may have read Naomi Klein and Astrid Taylor's piece last year, and they have a book coming out soon in The Guardian. They're saying, you know, we have the tech elite billionaires, some of whom are actually saying things like, we're going to build floating islands of where we're going to be complete rulers of you know, those capitalist islands. We are going to colonize Mars. Better yet, we're going to be immortal because we're going to upload ourselves into AI, right? They are actually preparing for this, right? So Klein and Taylor say end times fascism is a darkly festive fatalism, a final refuge for those who find it easier to celebrate destruction than imagine living without supremacy. Okay. So we have that out there. So let's come back to solidarity economy movements. How does this work matter? How does it encounter and engage fully with the state of things as they are? So for more and more people, it just doesn't make sense that this world can actually continue the way it is. And so if these are in fact end times for what I've been calling colonial capitalist modernity, then we come back and say solidarity economy is building some different ways of addressing that. Again, first off, meeting material and bodily needs, right? So it's showing different ways of how folks can have shelter, how folks might produce and distribute food, right? Again, it's building the solidarity and political power, because when you are in these acts of collective care, when you are working and trying to work cooperatively together, it builds those relations of trust and solidarity, right? That can be turned into political force, right? And then finally, it's shifting the horizons of possibility towards advancing other worlds. And this gives us yet, I think, another passenger on our bus, which I would call the radical realist, right? The radical realist is thinking this world cannot continue if we are to survive. It's saying, let's disinvest and help it to a dignified end, and hopefully feeling courage to live another way. And again, this is not just me saying these things. I'm just kind of pulling together things that I am hearing people say, that I'm in conversations with folks around. Here are a couple examples of this idea that we have to let go in order to reimagine, right? Elena Latona headed the Neighbor to Neighbor grassroots organizing group. In the very, very beginning of the pandemic, she wrote a note to her members saying, let's ready ourselves to let go of all that no longer serves us and the world. Reimagine a world centered in mutual aid, which means we are well when you are well. The Gesturing Towards Decolonial Futures Collective puts out this statement, right? We propose that a decolonial future requires a different mode of coexistence that will only be made possible with and through the end of the world as we know it, which is a world that's been built and maintained by different forms of violence and unsustainability. And this collective is largely is an collective of indigenous scholars. For many indigenous peoples, the apocalypse have already happened more than once, right? So end of this world doesn't mean the end of existence. So let's talk a little bit about this world that we think might be ending, all right? And I'm just going to say, you know, there's a lot more to unpack about colonial capitalist modernity, but I am going to just say that, you know, one, it makes itself seem like it is the only world that can exist. It's a one world formula. It's premised on separations between people and nature, and supports all those binaries. I'm just going to read kind of the story of modernity, because hopefully this will feel familiar to you. This will explain what colonial capitalism and modernity actually is, all right? This is the story. There's only one world that is out there, separate from us. that exists, whether we are here or not. This view of reality is based on being able to divide and separate. I am separate from you. Each of us is separate individuals until we come together in community. We humans are separate from nature. This habit of separation extends to familiar dualist categories: subject, object, theory, practice, knowing, feeling, living, non-living, man, woman, hetero, queer, fact, fiction, and more. These binaries and hierarchies that they imply are so ingrained that they seem natural, as if they have always existed and are just part of the essence of things. To know this reality requires the scientific method, where we separate ourselves as neutral observers to collect data to understand the dynamics and laws of the world out there. In this one world, there are empty lands waiting to be discovered, occupied, and put to better use by colonizers, who also bring civilization, development, and progress to the native inhabitants. In this one world, land is an object to be possessed as property. In this one world, there is such a thing as an individual who, prior to being part of a community, has preferences and values and can make rational choices about what kind of government, what kinds of exchanges they want in the government, in the market, that will best serve their self-interest. In this one world, there is no existence of anything else. So other worldviews and cosmologies are just cultural beliefs and fictional stories, but not real. And you can see kind of one construction of the House of Modernity on the right there by the Gesturing Towards the Colonial Futures Collective. Countering this, of course, is a different approach, a pluriverse. We want a world where many worlds fit. What's behind this is the story of relationality. And I'm just going to read what I've got on that. What if nothing existed or is real prior to being in relation? What if we can only become individuals in relation to other humans, in relation to the more than human beings in the ecosystem, in relation to the Earth's life support systems, in relation to the bacteria in our guts that support our very ability to breathe and digest? What if we were always interdependent and part of making, as well as being made by these webs of relations? Then we are always part of multiple realities or worlds that are always in the process of becoming and unbecoming. Then the one world becomes just that, a particular and historically specific reality. So I'm going to take the last few minutes here to talk about how are some of the actual examples of solidarity economy projects and initiatives in this state navigating their work in all of these dimensions, particularly in the worlding dimension. I'm going to start here with, I had talked about the Cerro Co-op earlier, right, being the tail end of that emerging food solidarity economy. Well, their story doesn't actually start with that co-op. It starts with folks who started another project a few years before that. Tim Hall and several other folks who were with the Boston Workers Alliance, they were members. They were folks who were under and unemployed. They said, we can build our own green jobs. They found out about, that it's actually not very high tech to process spent vegetable oil into biodiesel that you could put into diesel engines. So they said, yeah, let's do it. Let's go get ourselves a truck. Let's find a garage space. We'll go and collect all that vegetable oil that otherwise these restaurants in our neighborhood have to dump. And maybe they'll even pay us for that. And then we can sell the biodiesel. So there was they were super, super jazzed about that. Tim, though, says a few years after that experience, I went to the business school of hard knocks because they just kind of bootstrapped everything. Their truck broke down. The garage they were using, they actually had an oil spill. And they ran out of capital to keep the business running. But for them, the end of that business was not the failure of the idea or the model. It just actually spurred them to say, you know what, that didn't work. But the idea that we could be a part of this economy, to do this type of work, to make the green economy with our own green jobs, that stuck with them. So they said, you know what, we're going to regroup. And they actually teamed up with another set of workers that were being organized by the Coalition of Worker Health and Safety, MassCosh, and They went through and developed their own business plan through a co-op academy. They then crowdsourced about $10,000 so that they could then go through what's known as a direct public offering, so that small investors could then put equity into their company, but they wouldn't have voting power. So they raised $340,000 in startup capital. That allowed them to go buy 2 trucks. And to this day, they have an operating business with 9 people. All right. So again, what might be seen as a failure in the dominant world, right? They were able to keep the dream alive, and yeah, they are still having to compete with all the other folks trying to do this work. And they've managed to actually continue and realize parts of their model. We talked about the Boston Ujima project earlier as well, and said that they had built this $4.5 million investment fund. I'm actually I have a $1,000 note in Ujima that's coming due next year. But it's non-extractive, which means that the people who are more financially stable and secure, putting in larger amounts, like foundations, they are the first ones to lose their money, right? This is the opposite of the way that most banking and finance works, right? Where the people who have the most money are the most protected. And so that's why it's a non-extractive investment fund. They have 900 plus members. Those members are the ones who actually vote on the businesses that they want to provide loans to. But the reason I include Ujima here is that in the dominant world, we can look at them as, wow, isn't it cool? They're doing alternative finance, right? Those of you who take Jeff Rosen's impact investing classes and the community investment class, you'll learn all about things like Ujima. But Ujima has invested a lot, and you can see in one of their Instagram posts on the right here, they invest a ton in arts and cultural organizing. They support artist fellowships. They are backing all kinds of festivals and convenings and gatherings to celebrate Black joy, to really bring people together into experience that is not just about let's get money out the door. Because for them, and this is what Nia Evans, Ujima's executive director, says, Ujima is what's next because we're doing it. We're trying our best to create the future and to create that experience of what it is like to actually exist in that future. And then finally, mutual aid as a way of being. So I've had a chance to work with actually a number of students and many community partners that are doing mutual aid over the last several years. And we've been learning a lot about the challenges and opportunities of doing this work, especially a lot of it that intensified during the pandemic. And East Boston was a real hotbed of both pandemic impact as well as mutual aid response. And I've learned a lot from what they've been doing there. Mutual Aid Eastie is a network that still exists to this day that started during the pandemic. And Luz Zambrano with the Center for Cooperative Development and Solidarity in East Boston, right? She was and her organization was one of the folks that backed Mutual Aid Eastie. They defined it as, she defines mutual aid as you give and you receive. It's very simple, right? And this actually counters a lot of what people call mutual aid, which was just some people giving and some people receiving, but they're not the same people, right? That's charity. That's servicism, as some of our partners call it. We can talk more about like how hard it is to do this work, but to say what they're trying to do is actually very easy. They're saying, we just want to exist to be a network so that neighbors can care more for each other, right? And what can we do to create the conditions to make that happen? What practices and projects can we put out into the community to enhance those connections, right? That's what they're trying to do. And I love this quote from Annie Lovo, which is, she was with another organization in East Boston that helped back this mutual aid. And this is translated from the original Spanish, but it says, she says, we have to learn to be more human, right? Be more empathetic. The last thing we want to do is to go back to the life we had before. We have to come out as better people, because I think that what already existed before was the problem, right? Prior to pandemic. And so for her, being involved in mutual aid work really is intentionally about not just creating a different way of being, but different humans on the other side. All right, so I'm going to close again by just sharing a couple of quotes from this work. Again, I'm going to quote Luce, why do we need to continue to fight and build, and to do so not contained within colonial capitalist modernity? Well, she says, I've been a community organizer and labor organizer for 34 years. I got tired of fighting a system that I don't see changing. It is better to put our energy, efforts, and wisdom and experiences to create our own. And then finally, Nia Evans with the Boston Ujima Project. We asked her a couple of years ago, how she was feeling about this whole sector of work. And she answered with one word, pregnant. And then she explained. She said, we have a lot of inspiring things happening. I think there is some mainstreaming happening. I think there is some co-opting happening. I think so much is possible, and where we are right now could go in a few different directions. Feels like even if there is a regression or retrenchment, it feels like there are some things that will stick and there are some things that will stay. And I'll end with that because I feel like that's really where we're at. These projects are ongoing. None of them provide any guarantees that we actually are going to create other worlds. They all create that possibility. The only way we can figure this out is by doing it together. And, I love the quote, we make the road by walking. And I'm just going to add kind of an addendum to that. We make our worlds by living. Thanks. Some questions.
Wow, thanks, Penn. Buzzing with ideas and realizing, how similar the solidarity economy work is to my own work in just sustainabilities. We use very similar vocabularies. So just one thing, you mentioned scaling, and a lot of people talk about scaling up, scaling out. When I was in Montreal, they taught me another form of scaling deep. And that is, hearts and minds. And so, when we're thinking about this work, doing it is one thing, but changing our worldviews, by scaling deep, I think is really important. So it's just another dimension of scaling that I think sometimes, gets forgotten. So we've got a whole bunch of questions coming up here. LK says, how important are getting grants to keeping solidarity economy movements going?
All right, so the question is, how important are grants to solidarity economy movement? And if you're asking that question about the work that I've been involved in, mostly based in the Boston area and the ones I know about in Massachusetts, the answer is pretty significantly. Grants from progressive funders have been a really significant part of the support. Now, we all, and I've long had my own critique of the nonprofit industrial complex, and lots of folks like, we can't depend on foundations forever. Most philanthropy is not oriented in our direction. It's just a very small fraction, but folks are making good use of it. The way I might think about grants and might ask funders to think about them is just that, this is a practice of gifting. You can just give something to someone else without having to require them to, write a 100-page report answering how they've, met all of your criteria, right, point by point. But you can just trust that they will try to figure out how to do the best with it that they can. And during the pandemic, lots of funders actually figured out how to do that because they recognize, oh my gosh, there's this need. There's these groups that are set up and positioned well to meet those needs. They just need our resources. So some funders have stayed in that mode, but unfortunately some have kind of went back to their business as usual. But don't get me started on talking more about foundations. But Lisa Owens, who I quoted before, is actually the head of the Hyams Foundation, where I'm also on the board. And we've been trying to figure out how can we be a movement funder, help build the movement infrastructure that helps to support work like this.
Great, thanks, Ben. We've got a question from Filene Taylor. What alternate kinds of organization formation can groups and individuals use to legally form these solidarity economy organizations? For example, Filene then says, does the Commonwealth have a public benefit LLC structure, a non-profit public good legal structure? So have you any opinions on that?
Yeah. So yeah, the question is about different legal structures. And this is where I want to just say that this is where we need to be cautious about and cognizant around like how we're thinking about worlding work, right? So in the worlds that we want to build, they probably won't have the same legal codes, right, that turn, for instance, land into property. And we are still embedded and entangled in that world, right? So I would say this is where lots of folks are getting creative about how to do this. I don't have any direct answers to your questions. There actually is a whole set of lawyers who are working on these issues. I know the Sustainable Economies Law Center out in Oakland is one of those. Carlos Teuscher runs a whole clinic at Boston College Law School that helps support worker co-ops. I know LLCs give you a wide variety of flexibility to do different types of practices. So, you know, and there's also a cooperative legal code here in Massachusetts. So, you know, the point is like those codes don't determine who you are, right? They're just a tool to try to figure out how to be the way you want to be. And if they don't serve you, then you have to like adjust. But I think folks are trying to figure out how to navigate. And this is, you know, some of my students have been really lifting up this idea of the trickster. And, you know, how do we use existing systems in a way to really achieve aims that the system wasn't designed to meet? And but we use them nonetheless. This is an example of using some of the master's tools to build beyond.
Dan Wu asks, what are some of the top unresolved challenges that the field faces that its leaders are actively trying to resolve, and what's been tried so far to address them?
Oh boy. I will say, I'm going to answer that in two parts. One is that whenever people start actual projects that are trying to do something and do something that's really recognized as economic, then they are almost all of them run into this point where like, you know what, we started this co-op because we really wanted to figure out how to live and practice cooperation. But at a certain point, it's like they're trying to figure out how do we meet payroll? They're figuring out how do we get more customers? They're trying to figure out, right, how do we make ends meet? And not to say that those things can just be ignored because they cannot, right? But they themselves are recognizing kind of that tension between trying to do this in the world as it is, while at the same time trying to open up space for worlds as they should be. So, so that's kind of one level. I would say the other is that there are, and I think this is the point of my talk today, and there are growing conversations across the practitioners and movement spaces where folks are trying to say, you know what, we need to set our horizons to a different place, because it's not just having a successful co-op and being able to say we employ X number of people is not the end goal, right? We're doing that because we're trying to create the conditions for folks to actually live in solidarity, in interrelationship. And, you know, there are many ways to do that that aren't just doing a business or doing a co-op, right? So this is really what, and I haven't used this term at all today, but I will now. This is to me the level of ontological politics that really needs to be taking place. By ontological, I mean this is the fight over what we believe to be real and therefore what is possible, right? And you know, so we have to be really struggling at that level of, you know, what is real and possible, and not stay stuck in just the one world. Yeah.
Question.
Hey, Julian, can I'm getting one question from the room here.
Sure, absolutely.
I noticed a lot of, I mean, this is very good point that solidarity economy is very localized and very like neighborhood based, even like area in the neighborhood based.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think this should be something that's scaled largely into like regional or even like globally, or this should solidarity economy exist in these localized spaces?
Yeah, question was about kind of solidarity economy starting and being existing in local spaces, and whether and how to think about scaling to regional, national, international. I would say most of the folks that I've been involved with who are talking about this really do see everything as bottom up, right? That just because we're using the term solidarity economy here doesn't mean that it's exactly the same as what people are doing in Brazil. There are definitely differences that we'll never erase, and we shouldn't try to, right? And this is in fact one of the violences of modernity, is when you scale things up and try to do the same thing in different places with different people. So the idea is like, how can we strengthen, and this is where I think where Julian was saying, scaling deep and scaling wide, we want that to happen everywhere. And we should be learning from what other people are doing, but not because we think like we can just replicate their model, but because we have to figure out how to adapt the things that we're seeing them doing to our own local circumstances. And then the scaling towards broader levels conversation is mostly happening in terms of people talking about federations, right? Where power stays in the bottom and then gravitates up top, not the other way around. So people have to form these grassroots networks, right? And you can do that regional scale. There is a Massachusetts Solidarity Economy Network. That's one of those formations here in Massachusetts that brings people into a relationship to be able to do some of that level of scaling.
So we've got a question from Nicole Fina. How do you involve community members and keep momentum and involvement, knowing barriers to trust, availability of resources and funding? How do you maintain community building throughout long, sometimes challenging processes?
Yeah, so Nicole's one of our students, and Nicole, I know you probably have your own answers to that, given your own community practice in Everett. But again, I don't think there's any magical solutions here at all, right? Just because somebody gets excited about solidarity economy doesn't mean that they're going to do a good job of building trust and community, right? So people still have to engage with that, with those folks that they're trying to engage with, and trying out different things. And this is where I would say, we do have to pay attention a lot to those person-to-person kind of micro practices, right? This is not necessarily about institutional design, although, that can matter, right? Because like lots of people have commented that just because you create a cooperative doesn't mean that you cooperate, right? It gives the possibility that you might do more cooperation than something not, but you still have to figure out at that person-to-person level, how are you actually doing it? Are you creating a culture of practice and relationships that can support that? And unfortunately, we need to build our muscles on that front at all levels. And I would say starting from the time you're born, right? Imagine, and this is what actually the co-ops there's some childcare co-ops that are part of CCDS in East Boston. And what they've said is, we're not just doing childcare as a cooperative, we're actually instilling cooperative values into the children that we care for, right? They're setting up childcare venues where children are taught how to share and cooperate, right? How to navigate, this is all relational work, how to solve conflicts, right? In ways that are restorative, right? And so anyway, so Nicole, sorry, I don't have any magical answers for you. I think, we just need to do the hard work wherever we are.
So Penn, we're fast running out of time, so I'm going to take moderator prerogative and ask you a question. So as you know, I spent a year on sabbatical in Montreal and was amazed at the level of civicness in that city. The way people treated each other, the way young kids, younger than you would see, walking to school by themselves, checking in with the crossing wardens, and there was just a general level of civicness. I cannot separate that from the fact that Quebec has the biggest social and solidarity economy network, billions of dollars in that network. Do you think the two are related? The civicness. What I'm saying is, do solidarity economies bring greater civicness as well?
Yeah, so Julian, do solidarity economies bring greater civicness? Quebec being an example. My gut says, yeah, they're absolutely connected. Because I think we also had a chance to bring a number of solidarity economy movement folks from the Boston area to visit Montreal, actually using some of your connections a few years back. And that was something they really noticed, was how involved actual provincial and city government were in supporting their activities in a way that we could never imagine here in the US.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it's just like there was a level of care for people who are more vulnerable, right? That was just explicit. It wasn't saying like, here it's more like, how do we get rid of these people? There was like, how do we actually care for them? So, to me, that has a lot to do with both what has been able to be achieved at the political level in government. And because those programs exist and say certain things, right, they help reflect back onto, folks who are coming up in that system. And then the folks can use that to push it further, right? So hopefully it's a mutually reinforcing type of way that it happens. And, hopefully we're spiraling up instead of spiraling down. But, we can't wish that, what they have in Quebec or Montreal could magically suddenly exist here in Boston or Massachusetts. We have to deal with our own history and where we're at.
Yeah. Hey, Penn, quick plug for your book. I know it's still in the early stages, but you've got 37 potential purchasers here. What are you going to say to them?
All right, I'm going to say this out loud because Boone and I have been working on this book for the last 3 years or so. And we finally have a deadline of June 30th where we're going to get it in and hopefully it'll be out next year. We have a book contract, actually thanks to Julian edits a series over at Bloomsbury on just and sustainable communities. And so we're going to be publishing as part of that. So yeah, so look for it to come out hopefully in 27 sometime.
Great. Okay. Can we give a big UEP round of applause for our own Penn Loh?